Welcome to the Gamut of Performance Podcast, episode 31. On this episode of the podcast, I have Coach Brijesh Patel from Quinnipiac University. Coach Patel is just a great guy with a lot of knowledge, and he's been doing it at a high level at Quinnipiac for quite some time now. In this conversation, we highlight some of the current events in strength and conditioning and some of the things that have affected Coach Patel and helped him develop to the level that he's at now. There's a lot of wisdom shared in this conversation, so without further ado, here is Coach Brijesh. Coach Patel, thank you so much for your time. Really looking forward to talking with you and hearing some ideas. Most people already know you, but for the listeners at home, will you tell us a little bit about your background, your motivation, and where you are currently?
Yeah, I'm currently the head strength conditioning coach at Quinnipiac University. I've been here I'm going on my 11th year now. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, I was an assistant at the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, and before that, I was a GA at UConn. Mm-hmm. And I always kind of knew that I wanted to be a strength conditioning coach. And when I went to school as an undergrad, my second week on campus at UConn, I volunteered in the varsity weight room, and I was fortunate enough to be able to give opportunities to observe and ask questions, and they would ask me questions, and if I didn't know it, I have to go out and find it and come back. And, they allowed my experience to grow to the point where when I was a senior, I was able to get teams. Like I had baseball and track and field as a senior, as an undergrad, which is almost unheard of nowadays. But so it was an unbelievable opportunity for me. Very grateful and thankful for the people that I was with, and I was really fortunate. I was there for worked under Jerry Martin. He's passed away since, but he's been a legend in the field. Andrea Hootie's at Kansas. Tina Murray, who's done amazing things at Louisville, but now she's with the Sacramento Kings. Sean Wendell, who's with the Indiana Pacers, was there. Pat Dixon, who was with St. John's, Loyola, and now he's with a new company called Topical Edge. Butler, just countless numbers of really good professionals that I was fortunate to be around. Also did an internship with Mike Boyle. So I consider Mike a very strong mentor of mine. And so that's kind of a little bit of my road and my journey. And I've been in it for a good amount of time now.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And you recently got nominated for Strength and Conditioning Coach of the Year through the NSCA, right? So will you kind of just touch on what that means to you?
Yeah, I think it's very humbling. To even just be nominated, and if I make it to be as a finalist or anything like that's even better. But just to be nominated by peers, by an organization I respect, it is really humbling. So I'm honored at that. Just a little bit of recognition.
No, and that's one of the things, right? Being in this profession is it's kind of a thankless job. So to be able to get that recognition on that scale, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So diving into a little bit of current topics in strength and conditioning, right? There's been a recent article that kind of talks on the gut and brain linkage and the neuron linkage between the gut and brain. So what implications does that kind of have for strength and conditioning, mood, energy states, and how that can affect performance?
You know what's ironic, Juan, is that one of my former athletes, she played basketball here at Quinnipiac. Didn't have the career that she wanted. Ended up stopped playing after junior year. Always was pretty lethargic and pretty didn't have a ton of energy. Didn't think that I actually reached her like when I coached her, and she wasn't very strong, very physical. Didn't improve that much. She recently just sent me a Facebook message, and after she graduated from college, she started getting into a little bit more doing research of her own into nutrition and gut health and things like that, to the point where she became she's getting her master's in psychology with a concentration in neurobiology, with a concentration in stress, chronic stress. And she was just sending me some stuff about just how crazy it is of the neuron, the linkage between your gut and your brain, and how it's real, and how it really plays a part in stress, in creating the stress response, but also in neurology, and ultimately how your brain functions with the rest of your body.
Okay, no, that's super interesting.
So it's really cool. So I think that's like a new avenue, a new path that people are going to start to understand, and I think it trickles down to strength conditioning coaches who want to look for optimal performance, right? And start to understand that what you put into your mouth plays a large role in ultimately how you feel. I think we can all agree that nutrition plays a big part in how we feel in our performance, but I think even on a greater level, the context of what you eat, why you eat, the state of the food that you eat it in is going to play even a larger role in getting you to understand how to get the most out of your body. And your body's really ultimately controlled by your brain. And so everything is neurally regulated. So we have to learn how to think. How we train obviously is affecting our brain, but also the energy, the environment that we create in our room is ultimately affecting neurology and the performance that we can get, like energy you mentioned, but also the foods that we give to our student athletes too. Or if we're not in situations where we're fortunate enough to give a lot of food, then food recommendations that we give, you know?
No, I think that's really important, right? And I think another important thing is you touched on the things that we eat, but the things that we don't eat, right, might be also playing a huge role. You can see that a lot of times in those early workouts, right? And there's a multitude of things that might be coming into effect in mood state there. But the fact that kids might not be eating in those morning workouts and the dysregulation of the hormones and mental state, all that kind of stuff, that's another implication that I think people don't think about.
Oh, man, I think it's completely untapped. There are some people that start to understand that, and I think those are people that start to understand things from a holistic perspective rather than a reductionist viewpoint. And I think the problem in the U.S. and how we teach in America is we break everything down to parts, right? So everything is reductionist in the way we think of things and not understanding holistically how everything affects your body and your brain, your systems of your body, and ultimately how your mind plays a huge part in that too. But ultimately, what you eat too matters.
Yeah, no, most definitely, and that's huge. Kind of moving forward on these things, the theme of current topics, right? So recently, Charles Poliquin has passed, right? So how has his death affected the profession, both good and bad, right? And this kind of ties into nutrition because he was a big nutrition guy.
Yes, yeah. I was fortunate. So I first learned of Charles Poliquin through when I was at UConn. He used to write. For T Nation, right? And so T Nation back in the day, like the late '90s, early 2000s, was really, really good. Not saying it's not good now. I just don't read it as much. But I thought the Charles Poliquin had a really powerful voice at that time, and really at the forefront of program design and structural balance, and putting some of these concepts and topics that are out there that we've used for years now, but I really think he was at the forefront of it and really brought a lot of it to the mainstream. And I was fortunate enough to, like I said before, intern with Mike Boyle, and Mike Boyle was very heavily influenced by Charles Poliquin too, in his programming style. And I think he leaves a powerful impact upon the field, especially for there's been a lot of people who've been certified PICP and all those types of things. I never have. I've read a lot of his material and adopted a lot of things into my own programming, but I think when somebody passes, I think you're more aware of the power or impact that they have. Maybe not power, impact. I think when people are around, you sometimes lose sight of them or forget about them, especially because he's trying to rebrand himself as a strength sensei. But I think he left a huge impact upon our field, and I think some young strength coaches would really benefit from just reading some of his early program design stuff, rep protocols, structural balance, thoughts, and some of it stemmed from bodybuilding, honestly. But in reality, the guy worked with a lot of professional athletes, Olympians, and he's got some great thoughts on trying to improve weak points. And you understand how sometimes by stressing and emphasizing weak points of the body can actually improve the total system.
No, I agree. And I think it's kind of interesting, right? You touched on how young strength coaches can learn, especially. A lot of young strength coaches are not aware of who he even is, or even like Charlie Francis, stuff like that. It's crazy to think about, and I'm not that old myself, but the generation removed under that is like, oh, who's that? And it just
it was. I actually just got sent to me in the mail yesterday. This book by OPT Books by Al Miller, Johnny Parker, and Rob Panarello. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
It's like understanding Soviet periodization for the American strength coach or something like that. And I can't wait to dive into that. But like those are guys. Like I was fortunate to meet Rob Panarello. And he's fantastic.
Most definitely.
But Al Miller and Johnny Parker are absolute legends in the field.
Yeah.
And have done it for a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
I remember Mike used to talk about those guys all the time, Boyle that is, about just being legends and really having a great grasp of coaching and teaching, which is things sometimes we lose sight of now because information is so readily accessible.
Yes,
And people just know a ton of stuff. But it does nothing. Like knowledge is useless if you can't teach it to somebody else.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And our key role we're educators and we're teachers and we have an opportunity to impact people. But it doesn't matter. Like if you've read every latest research article or every book, if you can't communicate to people.
Exactly.
You know, that is the essence of what we do. But I think those guys got it. Like you know. Coaches of that generation, Charlie Francis, Charles Poliquin, Al Miller, Johnny Parker, like there's so many, you know what I mean? Who've done it for a long period of time, Mike Boyle. Like
the list goes on.
Yeah.
No, I love it.
Those are the guys that I think people need to learn from. The young strength coaches.
It's funny too because these young strength coaches are looking at people that are maybe like a year or two ahead of them, but like have a strong social media following. It's like, what? Like you guys, you know what I mean? Like these people don't necessarily know that much. They haven't had the experience that these legends have had. So
and that's it. And it's you know, I haven't had a website in some time now, but I used to, and it's the same type of thing. When before I had a family, right? Spend time and invest time, kind of like you're doing. And creating products and learning and educating. It's such a cool thing to be able to do in this day and age. But it doesn't replace any of those hours that you spend working with your kids. And just getting better at teaching and understanding what works and what doesn't work.
Exactly. No, most definitely. No, I agree. And moving forward with a little bit, let's talk about like training load a little bit, right? So we know that implementing an increasing amount of chronic training load over time will help negate injury, right? By having the system adapt. But so where does it differentiate of having like just junk volume and having like that high training load that will actually contribute to the athlete's adaptation?
I think a lot of that is developed in the off season. There has been a lot of people who talk about this minimal effective dose. Right? Have you heard of that?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah,
and so I'm not necessarily a believer in that in the off season.
Okay.
In season, absolutely.
Yeah.
You got to give them the minimum amount of dose to give them the maximum amount of outputs, right? Or you know, adaptation. In the off season, my thought process has been this for a long time. It's to get the athlete to learn how to adapt to stress. Like you want, and the only way you learn how to adapt to stress is to induce and give stress. You know what I mean? And stress is in different ways, and the way that we can primarily affect it is by volume, right? By volume intensity. And so intensity is one thing, but like nobody overtrains off of intensity. Very rarely. Majority of overtraining or like overuse or overreaching is going to occur from volume. So in the off season, like the training should be hard. It should be hard. Training should be long. Training should be voluminous. Because when you get to the season, you need to be able to get your athlete to handle going 6 days a week, 2 to 3 hours a day. And then adding school on top of that too.
I agree.
And so doing like 45-minute workouts isn't going to get you to be able to do that.
In
my opinion. In my opinion. So I think you need to be able to create a chronic load gradually over the course of an off season. To the point where their robustness or their ability to tolerate stress is going to be at a higher level. And then when you get to in season, like they're going to go through practice. The coach is going to have their duration of practice, and hopefully you strength coaches can have a relationship with your coach to get them to understand when they can go longer, when they need to pull back, so that the acute loads that they handle over a week are going to be tolerable.
No, I agree. And kind of another interesting topic on this, right, is some of these professionals, if we're looking at professional sport, may not have that ramping up of a chronic training load, right? So, they have some summer camps, things like that, training camps, and then those might not be very long, and then they're thrown right into, preseason, which now things are thrown in. So let's talk a little bit about current ACL injuries, right? So in the NBA, we got like DeJounte Murray. In the NFL, we got like Fozzie Whitaker, Hercules Mataafa. Like, is this the cost of doing business, or is this just poor preparation?
I don't know. I think it might be a little both. I mean, the contact ones, you can't really do much about. Like,
most definitely.
The forces that these athletes can create are ridiculous compared to 10, 15, even 20, 30 years ago. Right? And so,
agreed.
And our bone structure hasn't really changed that much. You know what I mean? And so, and ligaments haven't really changed that much. I mean, granted, you can improve muscular strength around that, but force is force. So the forces are going to be that much higher because guys are moving faster. And more explosively. Like, it's something's bound to give if you get hit at the wrong position. But like non-contact stuff, like a lot of that stuff is going to be positional. Not being able to get into certain positions, and what's not going to allow you to get in certain positions, it could be mobility, it could be neural, but a lot of it's going to come down to fatigue, in my opinion, right? So a lot of these injuries are going to occur when you get tired and you get fatigued, and you're unstressed or overly stressed because you can't handle the volume. So it could be the cost of doing business. It could be, which is really, in professional sports, if you start to understand this, a lot of it's a product of the CBA. CBAs that the union wants. Like, they don't want to do as much. They don't want structure as much. That's
funny to think about, right? That's funny to think about because, right, like, think about if we had a collective bargaining agreement in college, right? How many kids would not do summer training? You know what I mean? Like, and then how many more injuries you would have? Like, it's just funny to think about.
It is, and it's I think at that pro level, right? It's so much. It's wild, like how much money is left on the sidelines.
Unreal.
You know what I mean? How much money is left on the sidelines and guys who get hurt. But in reality, I think that's what it comes down to. Like, I remember growing up and watching football, and their training camps would be long, they'd be hard, they'd have double sessions, they'd have full pads. And they don't do that now. They don't do that because they won't play. Because they know it's hard.
Nobody wants to do what's hard, right?
No, they won't do what's hard. And you just got to hope that you've got a great culture and buy-in where guys understand, hey, you need to prepare yourself. Like, if you're going to go train off and go with a trainer or your own strength conditioning coach or wherever you're going to go, you better get after it, because when you come to camp, like, you need to be prepared to go. And so that I think so much of it's on a GM to create that kind of culture and that mentality and that buy-in, but also the leadership within the locker room, if they care enough about each other and to accomplish whatever goals that they want, that they need to do the work on their own. And so much is being placed upon not even like a professional team strength conditioning coach, but more on their own private trainers that they work with.
No, I agree.
And it's the same thing even in college. Like, if I'm fortunate enough that a lot of our kids stay here for the summer to train, but there are instances when they don't, right? And so you've got to create, hopefully, a strong culture of training where they want to do it on their own, so they can physically prepare themselves to be the best, so that they know, hey, you know what, I got to get in shape so I can handle practice.
No, I agree, and it's just that mindset. It's that shift of like the easy way versus the hard way versus like long-term benefit. You know what I mean? Like, and a lot of people aren't looking at it in that light. But talking about training structure, right? So kind of moving forward a little bit. So James Smith kind of recently submitted this article talking about how strength and conditioning is a dying profession, right? So it's based on his book, Governing Dynamics of Sport. And essentially he's saying how sport is like so divisioned off, right? And not everything is in quite a unison. So if you look at, like, say, Charlie Francis, right? That's a perfect example. He was like the sport coach and also the physical preparation coach. So he was controlling all factors in the direction of performance, right? And so what James is kind of alluding to is how a lot of strength coaches not necessarily focused on direct field performance, but more like weight room performance type stuff. So what he's suggesting is like the basically the death of strength and conditioning and the creation of a more knowledgeable sport coach that would have all those factors in. So what are your thoughts on this?
I don't think that's possible. For one, like I think the demands that are being placed on head coaches, like I think it's unrealistic unless you have an assistant coach who's on your staff that is in charge of that. it's going to be different. But if you start to look at even just like college athletics and the demands that are being placed on them, like the reason why there's so many other support staff people, it's because they needed people to fill roles. Yeah. So it allowed the head coach to focus on whatever area that they needed to, which is usually technical, tactical, and recruiting. You know, so they didn't have to handle fitness, so they made sure they hired a strength and conditioning coach to handle that.
Exactly. Yeah.
They hired a director of operations to handle traveling, meals, all that kind of stuff. So the head coach or the assistant coaches could focus on recruiting. You know what I mean? And you can't win unless you get players.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't care how good of a strength coach you are. Like you are. Like you're not winning unless you have players.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I necessarily buy in with that theory. I do think that the education of sport coaches needs to improve so that they understand physiology and biomechanics as they do like in Europe and other parts of the world. I think that would help them, and I think it would help create a better understanding. I think I've been fortunate enough to work with some coaches who kind of get it, or they're more open to learn from me. So communication and relationship has been really good. But I know that's not the norm everywhere around the country, and some coaches think that they know everything. And will sometimes impart their opinion upon the strength and conditioning coach. And I would hope that there could be a little give and take there, so they can start to understand the demands of the sport, but also if they can better prepare their student athlete for that sport. But I don't necessarily think that the strength and conditioning field, I didn't jive with the article that well. I think that it was actually a dying field. I think what needs to get better is how we get evaluated.
Oh,
right?
100%.
That's probably a bigger thing to understand is because outside of football, it's hard to measure the impact that we have, right? So much of it is subjective, right? Like you can, like, and he was right, like you can objectively measure if somebody gets faster, more explosive, stronger, all those types of, parameters, but that doesn't necessarily always equate to a better athlete.
Exactly. No,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? And that's our job, right? So if you have good players, our job is to, make them bulletproof. And allow them to perform their skills harder, faster, and longer. So if we can do those types of things, and we can help our teams be successful, then I think that's primarily our job, and that's our role. But it's hard to say, all right, our team average on squat went up X amount of pounds, or vertical jump went up X amount of pounds. We should win. Like, it's not the way it works.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? There's so many confounding factors and variables that go into winning and losing.
No, and there's a lot of that stuff hasn't even been like tapped into as far as like the factors that are implemented in sport that do contribute to winning. You know what I mean? There's so many things of like emotional state and like mental state and things that we don't even know of, like, the surface of the floor. Like, we haven't taken specific things into account. Some of that stuff's being touched on, but a lot of it's not really dialed in yet, So it's super interesting to find. And it's also, I mean, strength and conditioning is growing right now. So it's like the opposite of that, It's like it's kind of booming. Everyone's trying to get into it, and more avenues are being created. So it's hard to really say it's a dying field,
Yeah, well, I think you start to see more and more positions popping up, and I think, like, for example, yesterday, like, we had, so our basketball teams both had an off day. We had probably half of both teams, men and women, come in and do individual extra work that they wanted to work on. You know what I mean? So kids understand, like, and I think a lot of that comes down to the environment that you create, how you communicate that environment, and how you communicate what you value. So that the student athlete understands and trusts you, and I've said this to my staff too, likes you. Like, they gotta like you.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? If they like you, and they know that you have their best interests at heart, they're more likely to listen to you.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. I couldn't agree more.
So that's environment. Are you creating a warm environment? Are you creating an inviting environment?
Are
you creating an environment where people feel like they can actually grow and get better? Are you creating an environment where people can fail? Fail healthy and actually try to grow from and develop a growth mindset.
I think that's an important topic too, is an environment where people can fail, but come back and improve. Like, that's really important, because a lot of people say we don't accept failure, you know what I mean? But failure is part of growth, right?
Yeah, if you don't, like, obviously nobody wants to fail.
Yeah.
But if you understand, hey, I'm going to push myself so hard today, I might fail at this. and be okay to look silly,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the other thing too, is like a judgment-free kind of zone, taking Planet Fitness's monoline.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like understand, hey, it's okay. Like, you can't do this now, but if you keep working hard and you keep believing in yourself, and your teammates are going to encourage you, and one day you can do it. Like, that's such an empowering feeling. Is like I always say, like when females can start to do a pull up when they can do one.
Yeah.
You know, it's an empowering feeling.
No, I agree.
Being strong physically helps being strong mentally.
Yeah.
You know. And then I think that's our biggest role too, is allowing young adults to feel like they can do things that they couldn't do before.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen if you have a negative environment or a negative connotation with the weight room. It doesn't help if you're threatening. It doesn't help. And this is all like psychologically too, like psychologically and neurologically too. Like if you come into an environment that's that you perceive as threatening, you're automatically going to shut down. Your tone 100%. Is going to be increased. Your visual field is going to be decreased. Your anxiety is going to increase. Like, nothing good happens when those things happen.
Yeah. No, I agree, and a lot of people don't take those things into account. So I think it's really important to shed a little bit of a light on it. You know, so I like that.
Well, a lot of it, just being aware.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think nobody learns that in college either. Yeah. You don't learn that in your academia.
Yeah.
But you learn it if you're perceptive enough.
Exactly.
You start to realize, what really creates a great training environment.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No, that's important.
And then just build that. Like, if you're the head strength coach, like that's your job. Like, to try to create that environment.
Yeah.
And your job, your assistants, is to help foster that environment.
Yeah. No, that's really important. And then kind of moving forward a little bit, right? I know you're short on time here, but what are some resources that have had a big impact on you, whether it's a book, a podcast, a seminar, or a conversation with another coach?
That's tough. I mean, I'm a big reader. I think people should read everything.
Yeah.
Fiction, nonfiction, strength conditioning, management, self-help. But I think probably some of the most go-to books that I've recommended are How to Win Friends and Influence People, classic.
Yeah.
The 1 Minute Manager is good, but How to Move Your Cheese, which is by the same author. It's a book about change. You can literally read it in an hour. Way to Peaceful Warrior is a classic.
Okay.
Power of Habit is another one. And then another one that goes into maybe like non-strength conditioning is Chop Wood, Carry Water. And then the other ones are good, like Grit, Drive. They're all classics. Mindset. But it turned into training, probably Training for Speed or the Charlie Francis training system. Anything by Mike Boyle. Anything by Charles Pollock when he talked about Christian Tipo. Triphasic training is really good too. I think it's an advanced system, but it's Cal's chapter on stress is great. And Science and Practice of Strength Training. So I'm giving you a lot.
I was about to say these are all really good titles.
Trying to think of like classics that I try to recommend to people. That's probably a good start. You know. And again, just read. I'm actually really I've read Harry Potter. I'm reading Game of Thrones right now.
Okay.
Because I think fiction is good. I think to get it gets my creative juices going.
Exactly.
Things, but I think that's important to read too, and to get a break from the type of books I just mentioned.
I mean, all work and no play makes Jack a very dull boy, right? Simple. It comes right back to that. No, but those are all great titles. And then kind of moving forward into this last segment, these are just kind of some rapid fire questions. So I'll just ask, and you kind of give me just a a short answer, and we'll just kind of roll through it.
Sure.
So the first one is, if you have any, what are some quotes or mantras that you live by?
Excellence is not a... Oh, shoot. It's on my wall, too. Excellence is not an act, but therefore a habit, right? That's by Aristotle. I'm very big in behavioral modification. Creating habits. And human beings are creatures of habit, right? So we are what we repeatedly do. And so what we try to do with our student athletes is try to get them to do the same things over and over and over again, to instill those habits, not only for while they're here in college, but for the rest of their life too, because they're attributes that successful people have. So that's probably my favorite one.
Yeah. No, I really like that. Okay. What is the best advice you've ever been given?
Probably to never stop learning and always think that you can be better.
I like that.
And it's come from my parents. Like, I remember early times I got like a B+. And I'm like, oh, it was good. And they're like, well, why didn't you get an A? And I'm like, well, I just got a B+.
Yeah.
They're like, well, if there's a grade better, why don't you try to strive for it?
Yeah.
And at the time, I would like get annoyed at them and didn't want to listen. But then as I've gotten older, I'm like, you know what? Like, if I can be better, why not?
No, that's a good point. I like that. So in contrast to that, what's the worst advice you've ever been given?
I don't know if I'd probably remember it, because if it was bad advice, I wouldn't remember it.
That's a good point.
Bad advice. I don't know that one.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm the type of person that, like, if I hear something kind of negative, I usually just dismiss it and dispel it. Like, I don't really listen to it, so it's probably not worth holding on to as a memory.
No, I like that. Okay. Has there been a moment or a thought that's occurred in your past that you've held on to that has made a big difference in your current day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think it was my time with at Holy Cross with Jeff Oliver. I felt myself, like many young strength conditioning coaches, being all strength conditioning and all business and all work all the time, and didn't leave much time for a social life. Yeah. And I remember Jeff, he would often say, he's like, he would force me to leave. He's like, just get out of here. Just go run errands, go away, go do something else. Like, just don't be here. Yeah. He's like, you're run yourself into the ground, and he's like, you're not gonna do that forever. Doing it this way. Yeah. So he forced me to leave, and I look back and I thank him for it, because that's advice that I give to my assistants now. Yeah. It's like, don't be here all the time. Like, if you can leave, go leave. Exactly. I mean, like, it's okay to say no. Yeah. The day will move on. Yeah. The day will go on, and tomorrow's still going to come. Yeah. So when you have those pockets of time, like, try to choose activities that are going to fulfill you in other ways. You know what I mean? And I think we all love this, right? Oh, 100%. That's what we do. But it's important to understand, like, to find ways to play, right? Find ways within that. Could be listening to music, watching movies, reading books, going for a hike, whatever it may be. Like, just find ways to get away from the weight room sometimes.
That's good. Okay. Awesome. Well, Coach, this has been fantastic. How can people kind of reach out to you, follow your journey, things like that?
So I promise one day I'll have a website again. Okay. I just got to figure out the time to manage it and do all that stuff to do it the right way. But in the meantime, probably through social media. So Twitter handle is bpatel515. Instagram is the same thing. Follow Quinnipiac, so QU_strength. Same Twitter and Instagram, and those are probably the social media avenues that I use most frequently. Sometimes we'll post videos of our athletes training, thoughts, some images that we make. That's probably the best way to reach out.
Okay, awesome. Well, Coach, thank you so much for your time. I know you're busy, so it really means a lot for you taking the time out and chatting a little bit. So thank you again, and hopefully we can connect again soon in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Juan. Appreciate it.
Talk to you later. Thanks again for joining me, and if you enjoyed the podcast, please head on over to iTunes and write a review, or go ahead and give me a 5-star rating, or both. Next week we'll have another exciting guest, so until then, this is the Gamut of Performance Podcast.